also with that area, as far as increase is concerned, I try to discern what is the intention behind increase. Because I think that sometimes we in the church, we want increase of the wrong things. It's getting real quiet here. We want increase of the wrong thing. And so hopefully during these next 3 nights that the Lord gives utterance, I can hopefully and prayerfully share a word that will help us to appreciate what authentic biblical increase is all about. And so since that is the case, I would like to, if I could, call your attention and affection for the time that is mine to the oldest book of the Bible, the book of Job. Job chapter, I believe I want to go to chapter 1. Job chapter 1, and I just want to lift up 3 verses, verses 20 through 22. Job chapter 1, verse 20 through 22. Those of you, if you can, once you find it, would you stand for the reading of God's word? Amen. If you haven't, say amen. And if you're still looking, say amen. Oh, we'll give you time to catch up. Amen. Job chapter 1. Most of you all probably know it by heart. You've heard this text read and preached over and over again. And so while I may not say anything new, hopefully I will reiterate what has already been said. Job chapter 1, starting at verse 20. And I will be reading from the New King James Version, and you can follow me along whatever translation you have. It reads thusly: Then Job arose, took his robe, and shaved his head, and he fell to the ground and worshipped. And he said, Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin, nor charge God with wrong. If you all will repeat after me, verse 20, which will be our key verse for tonight. Then Job arose, tore his robe, and shaved his head. He fell to the ground and worshipped. Amen. I want to preach for the time that is mine. When worshiping God does not make any sense. When worshiping God does not make any sense. The English novelist by the name of Samuel Butler is credited to saying self-preservation is the first law of nature. That being the case in so many of our daily lives, most of us live by this particular credo, so we can promote, protect, and perpetuate who we are and the stuff we have. There is within all of us this instinct to do whatever we have to do in order to survive and thrive in a hostile world, in a crazy environment that has become broken, busted, and decimated because of sin. This instinctive nature to do whatever is necessary to maintain the status quo as long as we're getting the good end of the city. I believe it was Albert Einstein, that German-born genius who had a strong faith in God, who said, hunger, love, pain, and fear are some of the inner forces which move the individual instinct for self-preservation. In other words, to avoid hunger, to overcome pain, to attract love, and to deal with fear is not connected with some great spiritual principle or God consciousness or even Christian ethics. Rather, we do what we do because it brings us pleasure or it helps us to avoid pain. This is why we will engage in something negative or hook up with someone who makes us feel good, even though they aren't any good, because it feeds the notion of self-preservation. In other words, we are all trying to escape pain and death while seeking that which is good and pleasant. It is undergirded with the notion of self-preservation. However, if self-preservation is not tempered by some type of ethic or code of conduct, it has the tendency to corrupt God's creation, take God's blessings for granted, and and produce people who become idols in their own eyes and the eyes of somebody else. It will produce people who are creating their own sense of righteousness to justify their sinful impulses and their harmful behavior. Unfortunately, thinking and behavior like that has the capacity to influence our attitude toward God and our fellow human beings to the point where we think it has to be all about us. And that brings my question. To push the envelope even further means that when I focus on self to becoming the point of being selfish and disregarding God, that means that I will disregard my brothers and my sisters. Thus, I have the tendency to try to use God to promote my selfish agenda as long as I am preserved in the process of God's acting. In other words, as long as God is doing what promotes me in the eyes of others, I have no issue saying I'm the best. It is somewhat sad and even disheartening to know that this is the MO of so many church members. There exist too many church folks whose view of trouble and perspective of suffering has given them a bad theology. They think that a relationship with God exempts them from hard times, lonely nights, frustrating days, debilitating sickness, angry people, and defeating conditions. Many have bought into the notion that abundant living is a direct correlation between my social status and my socio-economic profile that promotes my self-preservation, which lets me walk around saying I'm blessed and highly favored. And so we don't feel too blessed when all hell has broken loose in our lives, and God is nowhere to be found.